Welcome to the President's Forum podcast, where we explore innovation in higher education. Today's conversation promises to hit our innovation theme nail directly on its head. We'll be talking about AI in higher education with Dr. Chad Raymond. Dr. Raymond's a professor of cultural, environmental, and global studies and professor of political science and international relations at Salve Regina University. Dr. Raymond is also a first-generation college graduate. It's something that he begins each of his new classes mentioning to his new students in the hopes that it will provide some who are also new students and first-generation students the confidence to proceed and to succeed in higher education. Let's get right to our discussion. Welcome to the President's Forum podcast, Chad.
Thanks. Great to be here.
We're jazzed to have you join us. We want to get into an AI conversation. You wrote an incredible article about that was published in the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's titled AI and the Case for Project-Based Teaching. We'll get into the specifics of that, but before I get into any of those specifics, I want to ask you, do you use AI?
Yeah, I do. Now it's pretty much daily. I use it to synthesize, ideas from documents, create first drafts, generate possible discussion questions, things of that nature.
I'm also a regular user. I think it's an option spacebar shortcut guy on ChatGPT, the 4.0 version, and my entire office uses it on a regular basis, and we use it for project-based work. We use it for synthesizing information from articles, from any documents that come through, so on a regular basis. So the two of us, our listeners can know, are regular users. And in my experience, I don't know if this is the same experience you've had, the jump in accuracy and in the effective use of AI is just incredible. I mean, from month to month, year to year since last year, it's amazingly different and better.
Yeah, even in terms of the stylistic quality, the writing that these AI chatbots will return from a prompt, it's better, formulated, more engaging, more concise. So, yeah, this has definitely been a rapid improvement.
Do you ever use it for image generation? I've dabbled in that.
I have not yet. So my image generation needs, now that you mention it, it's more tempting to play around with some images. But generally, my image generation is simply like I need a visual for a PowerPoint slide, and often it's like a little graph that I scrawl out on a piece of paper or something like that.
I use it for PowerPoint, or Google Slides, whatever. I use generative AI for images. And what I learned over the long weekend, I was working on a slide deck. I learned that if you query an image too frequently in too short of a time, it makes you take a 5-minute break. So it can service the needs of other image generation. And so anyway, I hit the limit when I was trying to say, okay, now try this, now try this. Now, anyway, it was interesting. Okay, so tell us a little bit. Let's get started. What are the lessons that you start your article and you talk about the lessons we can learn from the original rollout of the calculator when it comes to AI in education? Can you explain a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, the incorporation of AI into higher ed is probably going to follow the same path that math instruction did when calculators came on the scene in the 1970s. So math teachers responded to calculators essentially in 3 ways. First, it was total rejection. They banned calculators in the classroom. Before calculators existed, learning math meant memorizing a series of algorithms. For example, what is the recipe for solving a quadratic equation or calculating the square root of a number? Students never learned how they could apply quadratic equations or square roots to real world problems that mattered to them. It was really just drill and kill. And then second stage was this sort of equivocal acceptance. Math teachers began to allow students to verify their answers to problems with calculators. In other words, did they correctly compute the square root using pen and paper? The premise here was that students still had to memorize the algorithms because they would be helpless if a calculator wasn't within reach. Well, calculators quickly were everywhere, so that premise went out the window. And then the third stage was adaptation. Math instruction began incorporating calculators, and the focus shifted from memorization of algorithms to more mathematical reasoning, problem solving, essentially learning how to make sense of the world through mathematical modeling. So I think right now we're somewhere in stage one, the total rejection
Right.
phase, maybe at the beginning of stage two, kind of a grudging acceptance, but not really leveraging AI to its full potential. And I think that eventually, probably sooner rather than later, higher ed is going to be forced to move into that stage three. Um, I can give you another analogy. So I am old enough so that when I was a child, teachers drilled students in penmanship throughout elementary school. Uh,
I remember
typing,
these days.
typing was an elective class in high school, usually only taken by students in the so-called business track rather than like college prep. So now keyboards are ubiquitous. Penmanship isn't emphasized nearly as much as it used to be in K through 12 education. So in my view, AI is to memorization like typing is to penmanship. It's just a new world.
That's a great analogy, actually. And so do you think that we could go down the same path where there are students today, that go through elementary school that don't learn to write in cursive? And I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about your experience, but I remember in probably like third grade, fourth
Yep.
grade, where you start to learn like how to write in cursive. And we spent a lot of time doing that. I mean, I, I have no idea when the last time I tried, even attempted to write in cursive
Mm-hmm.
was. But
Yeah.
do you think we could get to a point where AI has removed the need to? I don't know, what is the cursive in this case?
Mm-hmm.
What would AI remove the need for students to master and allow them to focus on other things?
Um, Number one, just memorization of factual knowledge. So too much of higher education is still stuck in this mindset where students are expected to uh, kind of refer to or engage with a central repository of accepted knowledge. So, originally this was the physical library on campus.
Right.
A professor would assign a research paper, and usually, most of the students would wait until the night before it was due, and then they'd head to the library and start trying to dig through the stacks, looking for something that might relate to the prompt that they were asked to generate a paper from. Um, and now we've got, ever since the internet came about, we've had this at our fingertips. And it's come along in different forms. So I can remember when Wikipedia first arrived. And just like the calculator did in the 1970s with math teachers, Wikipedia struck terror in the hearts of, history professors.
Right.
And the same kinds of excuses were used with Wikipedia. Oh, there's no way to verify its accuracy, it's unreliable. And now it's, it completely displaced the old printed Encyclopedia Britannicas of the
Right.
world.
Right.
And no one really thinks twice about it. It's there. It's a resource. If you feel like it would be useful to access that resource, then you access it, and it's incredibly convenient. There's no
So tell
gatekeeper.
tell us about. I want to take you back to the calculator example. Okay,
Hmm.
and you mentioned that math instruction kind of went through three phases,
Hmm.
and we talked a little bit where we might be now. Let's get to phase three. Okay,
Okay.
so this idea of acceptance and adaptation and figuring out how to um, deploy this new technology to drive us to solve new problems or to be able to
Hmm.
focus on, more important issues.
Hmm.
If you do that with AI, if you're an early embracer of AI as an institution or as an instructor in higher education,
Hmm.
what does that look like to you?
Okay. So, in the broad view, and I'm speaking from the perspective of an instructor here, um, I see AI as enabling me to shift my focus in the classroom. Similar to, when calculators and computers became available for math teachers, they no longer had to devote hours and hours of class time to the memorization of these recipes.
Right.
Uh, so the calculator could do that instantaneously. So we don't need to focus on that. What we do need to focus on is understanding which one of these formulas should be applied to a specific problem. Okay, so it's getting at a deeper level of understanding or cognition than simply it's like, oh, I've got this specific problem over here. I know that we use this specific formula over here to solve it, but
Right.
we can't transfer that knowledge that we've memorized into any other different or new context. Okay, so it's extremely limited. Um, AI, I think, because it's so interactive that, as you've probably experienced in your daily use, um, you type in a prompt, you get a response, and in many cases, it is like having a conversation with, say, a tutor or just somebody who might know something more about a topic than
Right.
you do at that moment. So this back and forth channel begins to develop, and you can eventually guide the AI to uh, essentially help you yourself develop certain ideas. So it's almost like AI is a coach. Rather than a taskmaster who is saying memorize this, memorize that, unless you succeed at those very lower level tasks, you're not going to be able to progress any further. Um, AI is more like, well, let's try this, let's try that, see what works here. Maybe that will lead to something else.
I can't tell you how much I relate to that as a regular user of AI. I mean, it's iterative, and
Hmm.
you're asking it questions over and
Hmm.
over, a little different variants on each one, learning more things. Okay, let's now focus on this issue that you've brought to my attention. What about this? And
Hmm.
anyway, the iterative nature is very apparent to me in
It,
AI.
uh, I think another valuable aspect of AI is that it's a technological tool that, if it's used effectively, can restore to students much of the agency they've lost in their own learning, their own education over the last few decades. I think for far too many students, college has become a mandatory box checking exercise.
Right.
In other words, pay the money, fulfill the requirements, get the degree. Actual learning is an ancillary benefit. It's not the main product. At least that's the perception among a lot of students. So I think AI holds the promise of being able to um, uh, re-engage students, allow them to pursue topics that they are intrinsically motivated or curious about,
Right.
and then solving problems that actually matter to them.
Right. Right. I mean, the promise of productivity in problem solving when aided by artificial intelligence seems really high to me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. So let me transition to there's some real upsides for this. Can you talk to us a little bit about, are there potential downsides you see of AI being introduced in higher education and that we should be problem solving for?
Mm. Um, well, a near-term downside from my side of the fence, which is being the teacher in the classroom, um, is that we already see this massive adoption of AI by students to outsource the tasks of reading, writing, in the worst cases, thinking. Um, Colleges and universities, they haven't yet developed a coherent or well-informed response to this technological innovation, and it's forcing many faculty members to fundamentally rethink their classroom pedagogy. And they're, everyone's kind of off on their own, stumbling around, trying to figure out what might work, what doesn't work anymore. Um, for example, the humanities, history, English, philosophy, whatnot, um, they have historically depended on reading and writing for knowledge transmission and the assessment of learning. So these fields have been incredibly hard hit. So how do you take the sort of foundation of a field like philosophy, which has been for centuries, if not millennia, reliant upon the written word?
Right.
How do you move that into an era where you have AI, available to you around the clock?
That's a that's a tough question to answer. How do you
Mm,
do that? It's like in humanities, if reading and writing isn't the way you evaluate progress from a student, you have to work out models where you can. I mean, it's essentially um, it, it reminds me of a leap between the seat time to
mm,
competency based,
yes, yes.
and this is a similar leap. It's
Mm,
reading and writing to what, critical thinking,
yeah,
problem solving.
yeah.
Is that where we're going to be evaluating in humanities moving forward?
I, I I think people are going to have to invent a way to do that. I mean, if you look at the credit hour, it's as a bureaucratic novelty or mechanism, it's been around for about a century,
Right.
and it's strictly time spent in the classroom, butts in seats. How long,
Right.
and then that gets extrapolated into, well, this is how much the student has learned. They've spent this much time in the classroom, so voila, you're done. And anybody who's ever tried to teach in a classroom or online uh, knows that time spent does not equate to knowledge learned. But we're still using this convention.
Right.
Um, so just like in an English literature class, the convention of the essay is still being used, and AI has just completely destroyed that as an
Yeah.
assessment technique.
Right. Right. I mean, there's some work to be done before
Hmm.
this is seamlessly introduced into higher education and how you can evaluate progress and learning.
Hmm.
You know what's interesting, and I don't know how this relates to the way that we assess in an AI world, but I don't know if you've done this in AI, but I frequently will type in a prompt, and before I actually have the AI respond to the prompt, I'll ask it to refine the prompt.
Oh,
and
okay.
and AI will refine your prompt and put in additional uh, specificity, or let you know where you could add more specificity, and it'll actually help you get to the right prompt to get a 10-20% better return on that prompt,
Hmm.
which I find fascinating. Like it's just amazing how the AI is actually helping you get even better by refining that prompt. And it seems to me that at some point in the future in higher ed, one of the things that could be used to evaluate is what prompts are you using? How are you
Yeah.
using the tool itself?
Right.
How are you leveraging this incredible, magnificent tool to get to your problem solving? And maybe we could see patterns on how the best engineer prompts are using it,
Hmm.
or prompt engineers are using it to get to the outcomes that help them solve problems. I don't I,
Right.
I have no idea, but I think that that's an interesting field to explore.
Yeah. I mean, it's 30, 40 years ago, in a sense, students were graded on their skill at using the card catalog in the library. Um,
Right.
so it's are you actually grading the content, or are you grading the skill with which they use,
Yeah.
to create the content?
Yeah, yeah, the card catalog, that's another cursive
Right.
writing. It's gone. Yeah, nowhere to be found. Well, what now I want to wrap this conversation with a question to you.
Hmm.
Higher ed has not always been known to embrace innovation and
Hmm.
to lean into innovation. In fact, to your point, we've been using the credit hour for over a century to evaluate learning. Which,
Hmm.
the more we know about this, the more we look at it, the less it correlates. That credit hour correlates with actual learning,
Hmm.
and this is why a lot of students get into that mode and the thinking of I'm checking the box, I'm getting my seat time in to get a credential so I can get a job. It's not
Right.
always about learning. What um what do you see as the challenges moving forward in higher ed embracing AI
Mm.
and leveraging it for learning and problem solving?
Hmm. Well, again, this is from the perspective of a faculty member, rather than sort of the administrative or institutional side of a university. Um, but what I would say to professors who are hesitant to uh, learn how to incorporate AI into their pedagogy, I would just be blunt. I would say you should get out, find another business. Um, Willful ignorance, resistance to change. It's essentially a disservice to students. Um, and I think far too many uh, of the far too many people in higher ed uh, have that attitude. I think essentially it comes from the hyper specialization that occurs in graduate school. Too many faculty members delude themselves into thinking that when they teach, they're churning out carbon copies of themselves.
Right.
People are just as fascinated by their areas of subject matter expertise as they are. Um, but this happens so rarely in reality that statistically it's equivalent to zero.
Right.
I can give you a very specific example of this. There's a guy named Christopher Catherine. He's the author of a book titled Leaving Academia, A Practical Guide. He got a PhD in classics. And in graduate school, he specialized in the Roman poet Virgil. So this is like, centuries ago. He eventually realized that his entire audience for his work consisted of about a dozen people in the world who were also obsessed with Virgil.
Right.
That's it. 12 people in the whole world talking only amongst themselves. Once he recognized this reality, he translated all the skills he had picked up along the way, these are the skills that his graduate program never explicitly emphasized as important, and he turned them into a non-academic career. So I guess that's sort of a long way to my point of that. A lot of faculty members are not trained to think of their profession as something that evolves over time in response to technological innovation. So therefore, they're very hesitant to change the way they do things, even in the
Right.
face of something as dramatic as AI. So I think it would go a long way to solving this particular problem if universities began to emphasize more strongly the need for their faculty members to be responsible, to adapt to a changing environment. Um, uh, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Right. My experience with this is once you start using it on a regular basis,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to not see the value.
Yeah.
And so I would expect that many faculty members who are reticent to adopt probably haven't used AI very
Mm-hmm.
effectively to this point and haven't seen the power in these AI models. But
Yeah.
I can also see that there are going to be some rough roads in incorporating and figuring out
Mm-hmm.
how we look at ways to evaluate learning outcomes in the
Yeah.
face of such radical
Mm-hmm.
technology adoption.
Yeah. I think there's also a lot of room for curricular reform where instead of the so-called distribution systems of gen ed or core curricula, um, moving more toward a problem-based curriculum where students are presented with perhaps a slate of perplexing social problems, and they can dive into those that they find the most interesting, and then figure out a way to measure the quality of the proposed solutions that they come up with. And I think AI is ready made for that kind of process.
Right. In fact, you mentioned this in your article that faculty members should look at following the lead of medical schools that
Yes.
use that kind of curriculum model
Mm-hmm.
in teaching, and I thought that was a fascinating suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. We're looking forward to exploring AI and the world of AI in higher education with our presidents, and we'll do that in the coming months. And this will be a really nice primer to be able to explore the AI world in higher education. But more than anything, the President's Forum, as you know, we're all about innovation that benefits students. And to the extent that AI can put students in a better position to learn, to grow, to solve problems, and ultimately, to have better outcomes in higher education,
Mm-hmm.
we would love to see that happen. And understanding the environment that we're operating in, especially from perspectives from faculty, administration, and other higher ed leaders, is going to be very, very helpful to that. So I want to give you the last word on that. What advice would you have to administration as they are looking at this complex issue, and what would you tell them in the path forward? What does the path forward look like?
So I would say that the path forward is a path, namely the curriculum, um, because that will translate all the way down into individual classrooms, and what kind of teaching happens in them. Uh, so as I said, moving away from a very sort of rigidly constructed set of requirements based on this bureaucratic convenience of the credit hour, um, a curriculum that instead emphasizes students' ability, or the development of the ability to understand and apply principles to novel environments or novel problems. And then, once you've figured out a way to assess students' ability to do that, you're golden. That's really what we're all here for. I mean, nominally, this is what higher education should be all about.
Right.
Unfortunately, it kind of fails to meet that standard too often. But I would say that the thin edge of the wedge, so to speak, is how is the curriculum organized? What kind of message does it send to students? Does it send the message that college is simply an exercise in checking boxes and learning is not that relevant? Or does it emphasize a message that, hey, you're here to transform yourselves. You're going to have to take some initiative, employ your own curiosity, and work hard to develop these skills.
Love that message. Great message to end the conversation with. Thanks for joining us today, Chad.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great.
You bet.